My program begins by defining a function called getFirstRoman and it prompts the user for the first Roman, checks if it's valid, and if it's not valid, the program will continue to ask for a new Roman numeral. And if the program returns a valid input, then it's just going to return that Roman. So for that function, it starts off by setting valid as false, just to start off with, and while it's false, it's going to ask the user to input a Roman numeral, so it's going to say enter first Roman number, no spaces, and then .upper changes the input to all uppercase letters, and then afterwards it goes into an if statement that basically checks if it's a valid Roman, so then this is going to call a different function down here which we'll get into later, and then if it's a valid Roman, then it's going to change valid to true so that the while loop ends, and then once the valid Roman is inputted, then it's going to return the Roman numeral. So then the next function is called getSecondRoman. It's going to be the same thing, it's just for to differentiate between the first and second Roman numeral. And then afterwards there's a function called isValidRoman, and it's going to ask for a parameter which is going to be just a Roman numeral, or the input that the user puts. And this basically just checks if the Roman is valid. So then it starts off with, I set a variable called falseCount to 0. This is just to initialize it, and then it's going to change the parameter Roman to all uppercase letters in the next line. And then I created a list called valid Romans, which is going to contain the valid Roman numerals that the user can put, so it's going to contain C, L, X, V, and I. And then I created another list called invalid Romans. It's just going to have all of the impossible Roman numeral combinations, so that if the user inputs any of those, or if the user inputs a Roman numeral that contains any of those, then it's going to check for that, and if it does, then it's going to return an invalid Roman. So then after that line, it goes into a for loop that basically goes through the user's input element by element, and it's going to check that if any of it is in invalid Roman, then it's going to increase the false count by 1. And also if they don't contain any of the valid Romans, so let's say the user puts in an invalid Roman like M or S, then it's going to also increase the false count. So then in the end, if the false count is equal to 0, so that means that there are no errors, then it's going to return true. So that means that the Roman numeral is valid. And then if the false count is anything but 0, then it's going to return false. So then the next function is called Roman to Arabic, and it's going to take a parameter Roman, which is basically the Roman numeral that the user inputs. And then this function, it changes the Roman value to an Arabic value. So then I started off by creating an empty list called Roman as num, and this is just going to be added into as the function continues. And then the next line changes the Roman type to a string so that it can be iterated through. So then the next line is going to be a for loop that goes through the entire Roman, so then it checks that if the letter that the Roman is at is C, then it's going to add 100 to the list. If it's L, it's going to add 50, X is 10, V is 5, and I is 1. So in the end, let's say the user inputs XII, then it's going to create a list that goes, it's going to be 50, then 1 and 1. So then in the end, I added 0 to the end of the list so that all the values are accounted for. So if I did in the next line length of Roman as num -1, it's not going to forget, or it's not going to count the last letter. So then before the for loop, I put I created a variable called SUMOF, and it's just going to be the sum of all the Arabic values in the list. So then that's going to be the Arabic value that the program returns. So then for the for loop, it's going to be iterated by pairs, so it goes by 2s. And then it checks if the first character in the Roman is less than the next, then the second number is subtracted from the one before it. So for example, if it's IV, then it's going to be 5 minus 1 to equal 4 instead of 1 plus 5 to equal 6. So then in the end it's just going to get that num and then add it to sum of, and then it's going to continue throughout. So then if the Roman num at I, so the first character, is greater than the next, then the values are added. So if it's LX, it's going to be 50 plus 10 to equal 60. Then same as before, it's going to add num to sum of. And then if the two numbers are equal, then it's just going to add to each other. So if it's XX, then it's going to be 10 plus 10 to equal 20. And then in the end, it's just going to return sum of, which is going to be the Arabic value. And then the next function is going to be called Arabic to Roman, and then it's going to take the parameter Arabic. So this function converts the Arabic value to a Roman value, and it's going to start by changing the parameter to a string so that it can be iterated through. And then after that line, I initiated a variable called num, and it's just going to be an empty string. And then it's going to be a bunch of if statements that pretty much just checks what value it is and then converts it to the corresponding value. So for example, if it's 1, then it's just going to change it to I, and then it's going to add that into the string. And then this checks how many digits is, or how many digits is in the Arabic parameter. So then if it's 1, then it's just going to go through this if statement. If it's 2 digits long, then it's going to go through this, so it's going to get the first number in the tens place. So if it's 2, then it's going to be XX, and then it's going to add that into num, and then it's going to check for the next digit in there, so the ones place, and if it's 4, then it's going to add IV. So then after that there's another if statement to check if the number is 3 digits long. It's going to do the same thing, except this time it's going to have 3 digits, so it's going to go from 1, 2, and then 3. And then in the end, it's just going to return num, which is going to be the Roman value. Okay, after that, it's going to be the function add, so it's going to take two parameters, Roman 1 and Roman 2. Then the first number is going to be the first Roman is going to change it from a Roman to an Arabic, so then you get just a normal number, and then it's going to do the same thing for the second number, and then it's just going to add them together in sum of Roman. It's going to return that. Same thing for the sub, so this time it's the same thing, it's just going to be subtraction, so it's going to take two parameters, converts them to Arabic numbers, and then subtracts them to get the difference, and it's going to return the difference. And then for multiply, it's going to be the same thing, just with multiplication. And then for division, it's going to be a little different. I have two functions for them, so the first function is going to get the whole number, and then the second function is going to get the remainder. So then to get the whole number, I'm going to convert the two parameters to Arabic numbers to start off, and then I'm going to do a float division so that I only get the whole number before the remainder. And then the only difference for the remainder function is that I do modulus so that it gets the remainder instead. So then the next function is going to be the menu, which just prompts the user the menu. So then it's going to ask to select from the following, and then it's going to display all the options, and then it's just going to print those. And then these two lines is just to print a new line so that it looks cleaner. And then the last function is the main function. So this prints out by starting a welcome statement. So it says welcome to the Roman numerals calculator. And then this variable is set to true. This is just for the exit program. So if it's true, the program's going to continue, and if it's false, then the program's going to exit. So then it's set at true first so that the program can actually start. So then while cont is true, the menu is going to keep prompting. If not, it's going to quit. So then once it's true, then I'm going to call menu to display the menu up here. And then afterwards, it's going to ask the user for an input, so it's going to be A, S, M, D, or Q. And then that's going to be set to the variable selection. And then afterwards, it's going to ask it's going to have an if statement. So if selection is A, so this part checks if it's lowercase or uppercase a. Either way works. Then it's going to set the first number num to get to get the first Roman numeral, and it's going to check if it's correct. And afterwards it's just going to display the number, and then afterwards it's going to ask for the second one and also display the number, and then display all the calculations. And then same goes for the subtraction, multiplication, and division. The only difference would be the function that it calls. And then afterwards, division is a little different since it's going to call both functions that get the whole number and the remainder. So in division, it's going to say, the only difference right here is going to say division here first and then division remainder here second, just with a remainder. So that's the only difference for that one. And then finally, if the selection is Q, then it's going to change cont to false so that the program exits, and it's going to print a goodbye. And then right here, if none of these are inputted, so if it's neither A, S, M, D, or Q, then it's going to say invalid entry, please try again, and it's going to loop back, so then the program asks again. So then in the end, I just do main here to run the program. And to run a few test cases, I'm going to press run, and then it's going to prompt the menu and ask me to select an option. So if I started out with a lowercase a for addition, I can do XLIV, and then I can add that with CCLXV. So it's going to show that the value of XLIV is 44, and then the second one for CCLXV is 265. It's going to do the calculations in Roman numerals as well as in Arabic numbers. And then it's going to prompt the menu again. So this time, if I want to do subtraction, I can even do a capital S and it'd still work. I can do CCLV minus CXXXIII. So it's going to show in Roman and Arabic numbers 255 minus 133 is going to equal 122. Then I can continue and do multiplication, so I can put M. And the first number I can choose is like CCCXLVIII multiplied by 2, which is just II. I can even do capital II. So it's going to show the calculations. 368 times 2 is going to equal 736. And then for division, I can do capital D and it still work. I can do LXXIV multiplied by IX. So it's going to show 76 divided by 9 is equal to 8 with a remainder of 4. So then this is also shown in Roman numerals, so VIII with a remainder of IV. In the end, if I want to quit, I'm sorry, I can also show if I put an invalid Roman, so let's say I do addition for example, and I put CCCC, which is an invalid Roman numeral, it'd prompt the user again for a different Roman numeral. So then if I did III, which is also invalid, it'd prompt the user again. So I can do IV plus CCC, it's going to be 4 plus 300, which is 304. So if I wanted to quit, I can put Q, and that exits out of the program. And if I run it one more time, I can try to show how the program checks for invalid selections. So if I put H, which is not one of the options, it'd say invalid entry, please try again. Or if I put W, it'd say the same thing.